Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going to be talking about a case from CrimePod Castle's Twisted Love series, episode 24. It really shows how quickly emotions can spiral out of control, especially, in the pressure cooker of traffic.
Yeah.
We're going to be exploring the 2013 Ankush Chauhan road rage case from Gurgaon, India. It's a story that forces us to confront some uncomfortable truths about anger, ego, and the choices we make in those split seconds when things go wrong.
It's remarkable how a simple fender bender, can just ignite such intense reactions. And it often exposes the underlying stress and pressures people face in their daily lives.
Exactly. So let's set the scene for you. It's a bustling evening in Gurgaon, India, on April 14th, 2013. Ankush Chauhan, a 29-year-old cab driver, is finishing up a long shift. He's likely exhausted, maybe thinking about his upcoming wedding to his fiancée Mira, and looking forward to some downtime.
Sounds like he was juggling a lot. The demands of his job, the anticipation of his wedding, and probably just the general stress of city life.
Right, and we also know that Ankush had a bit of a reputation for having a short fuse. Now, I'm not saying that stress automatically turns someone into a ticking time bomb, but it's definitely a factor to consider in this story.
Yeah. But it's important to remember that while personality traits can contribute to someone's actions, they don't predetermine them. There's always a complex mix of factors at play in situations that involve violence.
Absolutely. So picture this. Ankush is driving home, eager to get off the road. Suddenly, his cab clips the side mirror of a sedan. It's not a major crash, just a minor bump, but enough to spark a heated situation.
It's interesting how such a seemingly insignificant incident can escalate so rapidly. It really speaks to the fragility of our emotional control, especially when we perceive a threat to our safety or our sense of justice.
And that's precisely what happened. Both drivers get out of their cars in the middle of traffic, and a full-blown argument erupts. Ankush, furious, accuses the other driver, Rohit Malhotra, a software engineer, of reckless driving. Rohit, in turn, demands compensation for the damaged mirror. Neither is willing to back down. Imagine the tension, the honking horns, the bystanders watching this unfold.
Yeah, that classic clash of egos. Each person is entrenched in their own perspective, and that just fuels the escalation. Instead of taking a moment to just breathe, they let their anger take over.
And in this case, that boiling point led to a tragic consequence. Ankush, in a fit of rage, grabs a tire iron from his cab and strikes Rohit in the head. Just like that, one moment of uncontrolled anger changes everything. Ankush, realizing the gravity of what he's done, flees the scene, leaving behind chaos and horror.
It's a chilling reminder of the destructive power of anger. I mean, the contrast between the initial incident, a damaged side mirror, and the outcome of fatal attack. It really underscores the crucial need for de-escalation strategies in these types of situations.
Absolutely. So what happens next? The Gurgaon police immediately launch an investigation. They start piecing together the events through eyewitness accounts. People who witnessed the altercation described the rising tension, the argument, and they could identify Ankush's cab.
Eyewitness testimony is valuable, but it's also subject to human perception and memory, The police likely relied on multiple accounts to corroborate details and build a reliable picture of what transpired.
And thankfully, they had another tool at their disposal: CCTV footage. Security cameras near the scene captured the confrontation in the chilling moment when Ankush sped away. This footage became a key piece of evidence.
Oh, yeah. Technology plays an increasingly important role in investigations, providing objective evidence that can either support or refute witness accounts. It's amazing how this type of footage can clarify complex situations. It's almost like having an unbiased observer right there.
Exactly. And in this case, the footage, combined with the eyewitness accounts, led the police straight to Ankush. Just 2 days after the incident, they apprehended him at his home. And you know what? He confessed. He admitted to the attack, but claimed he never intended to kill Rohit. He said it was a heat-of-the-moment thing, a complete loss of control.
That's a common defense in these types of cases, claiming a lack of premeditation or intent. However, the legal system considers the concept of reasonable foreseeability. In other words, could a reasonable person have foreseen the potential consequences of their actions?
Right. It's not just about what you intended, but also about understanding that your actions have consequences, planned or not.
Yeah.
With the confession secured, the stage was set for a trial.
This is where the legal system steps in to weigh the evidence, assess the defendant's culpability, and ultimately deliver a verdict. And in this case, the trial garnered significant media attention, becoming a cautionary tale about road rage, splashed across newspapers and television screens.
It's interesting how these high-profile cases capture the public imagination and spark important conversations about larger societal issues, isn't it?
Absolutely. And in this instance, those conversations revolved around the dangers of road rage, the consequences of unchecked anger, and the ease with which a minor altercation can turn tragic.
The Ankush Chauhan road rage case became a flashpoint for discussions about anger management, the impact of stress and societal pressures, and the desperate need for better conflict resolution strategies.
It's almost as if this individual case became a microcosm of a much larger social problem, forcing us to reflect on our own behavior. Do we contribute to a culture of aggression and intolerance, even in everyday situations like traffic?
That's a heavy question, but an important one.
Yeah.
Let's step into the courtroom and see how the trial unfolded. The prosecution argued that Ankush's actions were intentional, pointing to his history of anger issues, witness testimonies, and that damning CCTV footage. Their case was straightforward. This wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate act of violence with fatal consequences.
The prosecution's job is to present a compelling narrative that supports their interpretation of the evidence and establishes the defendant's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. They build their case piece by piece like a puzzle.
Right. But the defense had a different story to tell. They claimed the attack was a crime of passion, fueled by frustration and a momentary loss of control, emphasizing Ankush's remorse and cooperation with the police. They painted a picture of a man overwhelmed by life's pressures, not a cold-blooded killer.
The defense aims to humanize the defendant and highlight mitigating factors that might lead to a more lenient sentence. They argued that while Ankush made a grave mistake, he doesn't deserve the harshest punishment.
And this is where things get really interesting. We have two sides presenting two very different interpretations of the same event. It was up to the judge and jury to decide which story held more weight.
That's the essence of our legal system, a process designed to ensure fairness and impartiality, with each side given an opportunity to present their case. It's like two sides of the same coin.
After all the arguments, the evidence, and the emotional testimonies, the verdict was finally delivered.
What was the outcome?
Ankush Chauhan was convicted, but not of murder. He was found guilty of culpable homicide, not amounting to murder. This means the court recognized the severity of his actions, but didn't believe he set out to intentionally kill Rohit. He was sentenced to 12 years in prison.
That's a significant sentence reflecting the gravity of the crime. But it also suggests the court considered the defense's arguments regarding Ankush's lack of premeditation and remorse.
And as you can imagine, the verdict sparked a lot of debate. Some people, particularly those close to Rohit, felt that 12 years wasn't enough, that it didn't fully account for the loss of a life. Others saw it as a fair outcome considering the circumstances and Ankush's emotional state.
It's a complicated situation with no easy answers. Sentencing is often one of the most challenging aspects of the legal system, requiring a careful balancing of justice, deterrence, and rehabilitation. But this case goes beyond the courtroom. What's truly compelling about cases like this is how they raise questions that extend beyond the individuals involved and force us to confront societal issues that contribute to these kinds of tragedies.
Exactly. The Ankush Chauhan road rage case became a flashpoint for discussions about anger management, the impact of stress and societal pressures, and the desperate need for better conflict resolution strategies.
It's a stark reminder that we all have a role to play in creating a more empathetic and compassionate society. A society where violence isn't the default response to conflict, but rather a last resort.
So what can we learn from all this? How do we take this tragic story and turn it into something positive, something that can help prevent similar incidents in the future?
That's a great question to ponder, and one we'll continue to explore as we delve deeper into the aftermath of this case. You know, this case doesn't end with the verdict. It ripples outward, impacting not just those directly involved, but also the wider community.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's like a stone thrown into a pond. The initial impact is obvious, but then you see those expanding circles of consequence.
Exactly. And one of those circles encompasses Rohit's family. Imagine the grief and anger they must have felt, the sense of injustice at such a senseless loss.
It's truly heartbreaking. But instead of succumbing to their sorrow, they channeled that pain into action. They became vocal advocates for change.
Yeah, that's often how resilience manifests. Finding purpose and meaning in the face of tragedy. It's about turning grief into a catalyst for positive change.
Absolutely. Rohit's family didn't just want harsher penalties for road rage. They pushed for a complete shift in how these incidents are viewed and handled. They advocated for public awareness campaigns, educational programs, anything that could prevent another family from enduring their pain.
So they weren't solely focused on retribution. They were driven by a desire for prevention, to create a lasting impact in Rohit's memory.
Exactly. They sought to build a legacy of change from their tragic loss.
Yeah.
But what about Ankush? What happens to him after the verdict? Is there any sign of remorse? Any attempt to make amends for what he did while serving his sentence?
That's a question that often arises in these cases. Do perpetrators grapple with the weight of their actions, or do they simply fade into the anonymity of the prison system?
In Ankush's case, reports suggest that there is genuine remorse. He expressed regret during the trial, and there are indications that he's been seeking atonement while incarcerated.
Remorse can manifest in various ways. Some turn to religion, others seek therapy or engage in community service. It's a deeply personal process driven by a need to find meaning and make peace with the past.
It's not for us to judge the sincerity of his remorse, but it does raise a question. Can someone truly atone for taking a life? Is there any action that can balance those scales?
That's a question that has puzzled philosophers for centuries. Is there a point where forgiveness both from oneself and those affected becomes possible? It's a complex issue with no easy answers.
It really is. And this case, with all its intricacies and nuances, sparked a much broader conversation in India about anger, about road rage, about the kind of society people want to live in.
It's as though this single tragic event became a catalyst for a collective introspection, a moment for society to examine its own reflection.
Exactly. People started talking about the pressures of modern life, the lack of patience, the way we dehumanize each other on the roads, forgetting that there are real people behind the wheel.
Yeah, those themes resonate far beyond the borders of India. We see similar patterns of behavior globally where stress, anonymity, and a sense of entitlement fuel aggression and conflict. It highlights a lack of empathy and connection in our increasingly fast-paced world. It's easy to get swept up in that rush of anger, to let our emotions take over, especially when we're behind the wheel. But the Ankush Chauhan case serves as a stark reminder of the potential consequences of those fleeting moments of rage. Our actions have ripple effects extending far beyond ourselves.
Absolutely. It's a potent reminder that the choices we make, even in the heat of the moment, can have profound and lasting consequences. And that brings us to a critical question. Where do we go from here? What are the takeaways from this deep dive into the Ankush Chauhan case? How do we turn awareness into action and empathy into tangible change?
That's the question we all need to consider, both as a society and as individuals. Each of us has a responsibility to examine our own behaviors, our reactions in moments of frustration or conflict. It's about recognizing those triggers, those moments when our emotions escalate, and consciously choosing a different path.
Exactly. Take a deep breath, remove yourself from the situation, or simply let go of the need to be right. It's about rewiring our responses to conflict. It's not always easy, especially in a world that often glorifies aggression and competition. But it's a crucial step towards creating a more peaceful and empathetic society.
You're right. It's about cultivating healthier relationships, building more peaceful communities, and ultimately creating a society where violence is not the automatic response to disagreement.
As we wrap up our deep dive into this complex and tragic case, I keep coming back to that idea of responsibility.
Yeah, it really is a powerful concept, because it highlights both our individual accountability and our collective duty to create a safer, more compassionate world.
Exactly. On an individual level, we all have a responsibility to manage our anger, develop coping mechanisms for stress, and choose empathy over aggression, especially when we're behind the wheel.
It's about recognizing those triggers, those moments when our emotions start to escalate, and consciously choosing a different path, whether that's taking a deep breath, removing ourselves from the situation, or simply letting go of the need to be right.
It's almost like rewiring our brains to respond differently to conflict. And that's not always easy,
Yeah.
especially in a world that often glorifies aggression and competition.
It takes conscious effort, self-awareness, and a willingness to challenge those ingrained patterns of behavior. But it's definitely possible, and the benefits extend far beyond just avoiding road rage incidents.
You're right. It's about cultivating healthier relationships, building more peaceful communities, and ultimately creating a society where violence is not the automatic response to disagreement.
And that brings us to our collective responsibility. We need to create systems and structures that support this shift towards empathy and nonviolence.
What do you mean by that?
Well, think about it. We invest in infrastructure to make our roads safer, right? We have traffic laws, speed limits, safety features in our vehicles. But what about the infrastructure of our minds?
That's an interesting way to put it.
We need to invest in education, in programs that teach conflict resolution skills, emotional regulation, and empathy. We need to create spaces where people can learn healthy ways to manage anger and stress.
And it can't just be a one-time thing, right? This needs to be an ongoing conversation, something we integrate into our schools, our workplaces, our communities.
Absolutely. It's about shifting our cultural norms, challenging those beliefs that equate aggression with strength and dominance. We need to celebrate compassion, cooperation, and the ability to resolve conflict peacefully.
It's a tall order, but I think it's a worthy goal. And maybe, just maybe, stories like Ankush Chauhan's can serve as a wake-up call, a reminder that we have the power to choose a different path.
And that's what ultimately gives me hope. We may not be able to change the past, but we can certainly learn from it and work towards creating a future where tragedies like this become less frequent, less likely.
It's a future worth striving for. And for all of you listening, I encourage you to reflect on what we've discussed today. Think about how you handle anger, how you respond to conflict. And remember, change starts with each of us. It's in those small, everyday choices that we build a more compassionate and peaceful world.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the Ankush Chauhan road rage case. We hope this episode has given you some food for thought and perhaps even inspired you to make some positive changes in your own life. If you'd like to explore more stories like this, be sure to check out other episodes of CrimePod Castle. Don't forget to subscribe, share with your friends, and stay tuned for our next episode. We'll see you then.